Imagine trying to grow an orchid in the desert. You water it religiously, you fertilize it, you talk to it, you read every book on orchid care, and it just withers. Are you a bad gardener? Or did you just plant the wrong thing in the wrong soil? Your life is the same way. You're not unproductive. You're an orchid in the desert, and everyone keeps telling you to try harder. But trying harder doesn't change the soil. Passion does. When you find your right environment, you don't have to force growth. You can't stop it. The question isn't how to be more productive. It's how to find the soil where you naturally bloom. And I need you to really sit with that metaphor for a moment because it changes everything. See, if you've ever ended the day exhausted despite accomplishing nothing, if you've watched the clock drag during work but fly during hobbies, if you've tried every productivity system only to abandon them within weeks, you're not broken. You're not defective. You're just being asked to optimize the wrong life. You're trying to grow in soil that was never meant for you. The productivity industrial complex, all these gurus and apps and systems, they sell you a lie. They tell you that if you just manage your time better, use the right apps, wake up earlier, build better habits, you'll finally feel fulfilled. But here's what nobody's brave enough to say. You can't productivity hack your way into passion. You're treating a soul problem with calendar solutions. You're trying to organize your way into caring about things you were never meant to care about. The problem isn't that you're unproductive. The problem is that you're producing the wrong things for the wrong reasons. And your body, in its infinite wisdom, is refusing to cooperate with a life that doesn't fit. That chronic procrastination you beat yourself up about? That's not character weakness. That's your authentic self staging a coup. That's your soul saying no, not this, not like this, not anymore. And I'm going to show you why your so-called failures at being productive might actually be the most honest, courageous thing about you. Because once you understand this, once you really see it, everything changes. Productivity stops being a battle and becomes a byproduct. But first, you have to find your fire, and that's what we're here to do. Let me tell you about someone. We'll call him David. He came to one of my events a few years ago, and I could see it on his face before he even spoke. Completely burnt out, hollowed out. He was an architect, successful by every conventional measure. Awards on his wall, recognition in his field, good income, nice house, and absolutely, utterly miserable. He told me he could barely get himself to sit at his drafting table anymore. Every project felt like pushing a boulder uphill. Every design felt forced. He was convinced something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with him. He thought he was broken. So I asked him a simple question. I said, David, when was the last time you lost track of time? When did you last do something where 3 hours felt like 20 minutes? When did you feel so absorbed in an activity that you forgot to check your phone, forgot to worry, forgot to be anywhere but exactly where you were? He paused. I watched him search his memory, and then his face changed. He said, when I'm cooking, I love experimenting with recipes, creating new dishes, playing with flavors and techniques. I can spend an entire Sunday in the kitchen and come out feeling more energized than when I started. My wife jokes that I'm a different person when I'm cooking, more alive, more present. And I looked at him and I said, have you ever considered making that your career? And the look on his face. It was like I'd suggested he become an astronaut or a professional magician. He actually laughed. He said, that's not a real career. That's a hobby. That's something I do to unwind. I went to school for architecture. My parents paid for 6 years of education. I have a reputation, a practice, clients who depend on me. I can't just throw that away to play around in a kitchen. I let him hear himself. I let those words hang in the air. And then I asked him another question. I said, whose voice is that? When you say you can't, when you say it's not practical, when you say it's just a hobby, whose voice are you using? And he stopped. Because he heard it. The script, the should. The entire life built on someone else's blueprint. Here's what David represents, and I need you to really understand this because it's probably your story too. Most of us choose our paths before we know who we are. At 18, 20, even 25, we make massive life decisions based on incomplete information. We choose based on what our parents value, what seems secure, what will impress people at dinner parties, what sounds good when someone asks what we do for a living. We're making permanent decisions with temporary information, And then we spend the next 30 years, 40 years, wondering why we can't muster enthusiasm for the life we built. David wasn't unproductive. That's the thing. He was wildly productive when it came to cooking. He could spend 6 hours developing a single sauce and never look at the clock. He could research techniques from different cuisines until 3 in the morning and feel energized by it. His productivity problem was actually a misalignment problem. He was a square peg exhausting himself trying to fit into a round hole, and then calling himself defective when it didn't work. The breakthrough came when I asked him to consider something radical. I said, what if your lack of productivity in architecture isn't a bug? What if it's a feature? What if it's not a character flaw but a guidance system? What if the resistance, the procrastination, the exhaustion you feel, what if that's your soul's way of redirecting you? What if the resistance is information? See, we've been taught to treat resistance as the enemy. Push through it. Overcome it. Discipline yourself past it. But what if resistance is actually your body's way of saying wrong direction? What if it's not something to conquer, but something to listen to? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but Tony, I have bills to pay. I have responsibilities. I can't just quit my job and follow my passion. That's naive. That's irresponsible. And I hear you. But here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow and hope for the best. I'm saying stop ignoring the data your body is giving you. I'm saying start taking your aliveness seriously instead of treating it like a luxury you'll pursue someday. Let me give you another way of thinking about this. Imagine you're camping. You gather wood for a fire. You arrange it perfectly. You've watched all the videos, you know all the techniques. You get your kindling ready. You use your flint and steel. But the wood is wet. So you try harder. You blow on it more. You add more kindling. You rearrange the logs. You stay up all night nursing this fire that refuses to catch. And the whole time, the entire time, there's dry wood 10 feet away. You just keep trying to ignite what isn't ready to burn. This is what most people do with productivity. They're trying to set fire to wet wood, work that doesn't resonate, goals that aren't actually theirs. Paths that looked good in theory but feel dead in practice. And then they blame themselves when they can't sustain the flame. They call themselves lazy. They call themselves undisciplined. They buy another productivity planner and try again with the same wet wood. But passion is the dry wood. When you find it, you barely have to blow on it. A single spark creates a blaze. Time disappears. Exhaustion transforms into exhilaration. The work you do in 4 hours accomplishes what used to take you all week because you're finally burning what wants to burn. You're finally working with your nature instead of against it. But here's the paradox, and this is where it gets really interesting. We've been taught to distrust passion. We've been told it's unstable, impractical, naive. We've been taught that real adults do hard things they don't enjoy. And that's what makes them responsible. That suffering is somehow noble. That if you're enjoying yourself, you're probably not being productive. We've learned to divide our lives into productive, which means things we should care about, and unproductive, which means things we actually care about. And that division, that false choice, is killing us. And here's what happens when you suppress your passion, when you try to be practical and responsible and ignore what actually lights you up. Your passion doesn't disappear. It can't disappear. It goes underground. It shows up as restlessness, as chronic dissatisfaction, as that nagging feeling that something's missing even when everything looks fine on paper, as Sunday night dread that lasts all week, as the inability to be productive no matter how many systems you try, no matter how many morning routines you adopt, no matter how hard you try to care. Your passion is like water in a river. If you block the natural path, it doesn't stop flowing. It just finds another way out. Usually through anxiety, through depression, through physical illness, or through what everyone misdiagnoses as laziness. Your body is saying, this isn't it, this isn't the way, turn around. And you're responding by trying to force yourself to want what you don't want. The real question, the only question that matters, isn't how do I become more productive? It's what am I naturally energized by? And how have I been taught to ignore it? What lights me up? What makes time disappear? What would I do even if nobody paid me, praised me, or even knew about it. Think about children for a moment. Watch a 5-year-old before the world has told them what matters. What do? They follow fascination. A kid who loves dinosaurs will memorize hundreds of species names without anyone forcing them to study, without flashcards or rewards or punishment. They just absorb it because they're fascinated. A kid who loves building things will spend hours creating elaborate structures out of blocks or cardboard boxes. They're not being productive in any conventional sense. They're not preparing for a career or building a resume. They're just passionate, and passion makes productivity inevitable. But then something happens. It happens slowly, so slowly we don't even notice. Adults start saying, "That's nice, but it won't pay the bills. That's not practical. You need to focus on real subjects. Math, science, something useful." And slowly, painfully, we learn to separate who we are from what we do. We learn to ignore the things that make us come alive and focus on the things that will make us successful. And we call that growing up. We call that maturity. But really, it's a kind of death. And here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Productivity is a symptom, not a cause. When you're aligned with your passion, productivity happens naturally. It's not something you have to force or manufacture or discipline yourself into. It just emerges. When you're misaligned, no amount of discipline will make you sustainably productive. You can push for a while. You can override your body's wisdom for days or weeks or even years. But eventually, you'll crash. Because you're treating productivity like it's the goal. It's not. Aliveness is the goal. Productivity is just what happens when you're alive in the right places. Your body knows before your mind does. That exhaustion you feel, that procrastination, that inability to focus on things you're supposed to care about, it's not laziness. It's somatic wisdom. Your body is refusing to cooperate with a life that's suffocating your spirit. And when people say listen to your body, this is what they mean. Not just sleep when you're tired or eat when you're hungry, but pay attention to what gives you energy and what drains you. Your body is always telling the truth. Always. And here's another thing, passion isn't loud. We think passion is supposed to hit us like lightning. We're waiting for this dramatic moment of clarity where the heavens open and a voice says, "This is what you're meant to do." But usually it's much quieter than that. It's the thing you keep coming back to, the topic you can't stop reading about, the activity you do even when no one's watching, the thing you do for free. Your passion has been whispering to you your entire life. You've just been too busy being productive in all the wrong places to hear it. So what do you actually do with this? How do you take this understanding and turn it into something real? Let me give you some practical steps. But I want you to approach them differently than you've approached every other productivity advice you've ever gotten. Don't approach this as another thing you should do. Approach it as an experiment in honoring yourself. First, do an energy audit. For 1 week, just track your energy. Not your time, your energy. Notice when you feel alive versus when you feel dead inside. Notice what activities make time disappear versus what makes you clock watch. Notice what you look forward to versus what you dread. This isn't about judging yourself. It's not about being more productive. It's about gathering data on who you actually are, not who you think you should be. Second, ask yourself this question and write down the answer. What would I do for free? What would I still do if nobody paid me, praised me, or even knew about it? Those are your passion breadcrumbs. They might not look like a career yet. That's okay. You're not building a resume right now. You're finding a fire. You're locating your dry wood. Third, give yourself permission to experiment. Pick one thing from your energy audit that lights you up, just one thing, and dedicate 2 hours this week to it. Not as a side hustle, not as a future plan. Not as something that has to make sense or pay off, just as an act of feeding your soul. And notice how different you feel afterward. Notice if you feel more energized or more exhausted. That feeling, that data, that's what you're supposed to be chasing. Fourth, reframe unproductive. Every single time you catch yourself thinking, "I'm so unproductive," pause and ask a different question. Ask, what am I being asked to produce that doesn't align with who I am? Transform the shame into curiosity. You're not broken. You're just being forced to produce in the wrong factory. You're being asked to grow in the wrong soil. And fifth, find your fire community. Connect with one person who's passionate about something, anything. It doesn't have to be related to your interests. Just notice how they talk about their passion. Notice how they light up. Notice how time moves differently for them when they're engaged with it. That's not special talent. That's not genetics. That's what happens when a human being is aligned. And it's available to you too. You just have to stop abandoning yourself to pursue what you think you're supposed to want. You came here feeling unproductive, maybe even broken, maybe wondering what's wrong with you that you can't just get it together. Just push through. Just make yourself care about the things you're supposed to care about. You're leaving with a different story entirely. You're not lazy. You're not defective. You're not lacking discipline or willpower or character. You're a human being trying to be productive in the wrong direction, and your body has been trying to tell you this for years. The exhaustion, the procrastination, the inability to focus on things you should care about, that's not failure. That's your authentic self refusing to cooperate with a life that doesn't fit. And maybe it's time to stop seeing that as a problem and start seeing it as the most honest, courageous thing about you. Because it takes courage to admit that the path you're on isn't working. It takes courage to listen to your body when your body is saying no. It takes courage to disappoint people by changing direction. It takes courage to value your aliveness over your image. Here's what I know for certain after decades of working with people who thought they were broken. You don't have a productivity problem. You have a passion deficit. And once you fill that deficit, once you find the thing that makes you come alive, productivity stops being something you have to force and becomes something you can't stop. It becomes as natural as breathing. David, the architect I told you about earlier, he left his firm 2 years after our conversation. It wasn't easy. It wasn't immediate. But he started experimenting. He started taking his cooking seriously. He enrolled in culinary courses. He staged at restaurants on weekends. He let himself fall in love with it. And eventually, he opened a small restaurant. He works longer hours now than he ever did in architecture. Harder hours. But for the first time in his adult life, he's not trying to find motivation. He doesn't need productivity hacks. He wakes up excited. That's not because he suddenly developed discipline. It's because he found his fire. Your mantra moving forward, the thing I want you to say to yourself every time you start spiraling into shame about being unproductive, is this: I am not unproductive. I am misaligned. And alignment isn't found in discipline. It's found in honesty. Say it with me. I am not unproductive. I am misaligned. And alignment isn't found in discipline. It's found in honesty. Honesty about what energizes you. Honesty about what drains you. Honesty about what you do even if no one was watching. That honesty is scary. It might upend your entire life. But it's also the only path to actually feeling alive. If this landed for you, if something in you recognized itself in these words, do me a favor. Hit that like button so other people who need this message can find it. Drop a comment telling me one thing that makes you lose track of time. Let's celebrate your passion breadcrumbs together. Let's start building a community of people who are brave enough to choose aliveness over productivity. And subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep exploring what it means to build a life that fits, instead of forcing yourself to fit a life that doesn't. You don't need another productivity system. You don't need another app or planner or morning routine. You need permission to stop betraying yourself. You need to know that following your passion isn't selfish or irresponsible. It's actually the most responsible thing you can do. Because a world full of people doing work they don't care about is a world that's slowly dying. But a world full of people following their fire, that's the world we actually need. That's the world that heals. That's the world that creates. That's the world that's worth living in. So go find your dry wood. Stop trying to light what won't burn. Stop trying to grow in soil that wasn't meant for you. And watch how quickly everything changes when you finally let yourself pursue what makes you come alive. Not someday. Not when it's practical. Not when you have permission. Now. Your life is waiting. It's been waiting. And it's time to finally meet it.